Welcome once again to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. I'm a sociologist at John Jay College here in New York City. And today, my guest is a true life force. She's an incredible organizer, a terrific, energetic figure in the movement, Carmen Perez, who is the co-founder of the Justice League, as well as the executive director of the Gathering for Justice. And I love that term, the Gathering for Justice. So Carmen, thank you so very, very much. I know you're all over the place. There's so much going on. Thank you for taking out some time for us today. Welcome again to the Radical Imagination.
And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Terrific, terrific. So what's the connection here? You're the co-founder of the Justice League. The offshoot is Gathering for Justice, or how is that?
So the Gathering for Justice is an umbrella organization. We were founded in 2005 by Harry Belafonte after he was in a hotel room traveling for work and had witnessed a 5-year-old girl on TV by the name of Jaisha Scott being handcuffed. And she was a black girl from Florida. And he was shocked to have learned that this child was being held on charges and she was booked into a detention center for being unruly in the classroom. And so because he had serviced the civil rights movement through Dr. King and had lent his platform as an artist to really elevate the work on the ground, he felt like, how could this be happening in America today? And so he convened all his peers from the civil rights movement, SNCC, other elders, elected officials, and really had a conversation around child incarceration and actually driving a conversation around the country with young people and elders to bridge those intergenerational gaps, using child incarceration as a moral imperative. But what I think a lot of people didn't know at the time was that this wasn't just an isolated incident. This had been happening in communities of color, particularly Black, Latino, or poor white across America. And so he created this movement to dig deeper in communities, to allow organizations to have their autonomy, but come together for model exchange, collaboration, to build a covenant to not only stop child incarceration, but to build a movement to stop child incarceration. So that is an umbrella organization.
To see the links that different organizations, communities were experiencing, and a place, sort of a place where they can come together and talk about this.
Yes, and because a lot of us do this work, and I think oftentimes we're so busy, we're so caught up in the day-to-day that we don't necessarily have the time to come together. And so he convened different groups from different ethnic communities. And so we first started in Epps, Alabama, with the African American community to learn about what they were experiencing and to learn about the injustices and what were some solutions, right, of coming out of that. Then we traveled to California, to Santa Cruz, to Barrios Unidos.
Which is where you're from, right?
Yes, I'm
Santa
from
Cruz.
California.
California
yes.
girl, okay.
And to learn deeper about the injustice that was happening in the Latino community and sentencing reforms and all these different things. We then traveled as a delegation, Black and Latino, to the Onondaga Nation to learn about clan mothers and the indigenous movement, and then found ourselves in Appalachia, in Haley's Farm, and we learned about the poor white folks and what they were experiencing. And so we traveled to different places. We ended up in Orange County to learn about the Asian Pacific Islander community, all traveling with the common covenant, right, to come together to really find the intersectionality between movements, understanding that poverty and criminal justice, all these different elements were really impacting our communities in a very negative way. We had a national convention in Oakland that was hosted by a committee out of the Bay Area.
When was this now again?
This was in 2007.
Okay.
At the time, it was Mayor Ron Dellums that was there and also hosted us. And so we had a convention there where we adopted Kingian nonviolence, the philosophy and methodology of Dr. King as the foundation to civic engagement and our organizing. I'm sorry, I'm thinking quicker than I'm speaking.
No, we're following you. You're doing great. Yeah.
But certainly, I think, Mr. Belafonte had this vision to rebuild a movement using the tactics from the past that were used by our elders like from SNCC, but also allowing us young people to really take ownership of what the agenda was. So when we were gathering and we were asking, what are we gathering for? Mr. Belafonte would say, well, we're gathering for justice, right? We're really gathering to identify what the agenda is as a collective and as we move forward. And so a lot of our work has been digging deep in communities, but Justice League I'm one of the co-founders with Marvin Bing and another gentleman, Angelo Pinto. And so Justice League was a task force so that we could bring my generation together to really build collective power. From people like Immortal Technique, who's an artist, my son, Lennon, who's an artist, Tamika Mallory, who's a communications expert, Angelo Pinto, who runs a campaign for Raise the Age, Marvin Bing, who is part of Amnesty International, Art for Amnesty. So it was a collective of us that had come together to really bring our resources to build an agenda that would dismantle the criminal justice system and identify the pillars that hold it up and allow for entry points. And so what people often see is Justice League NYC, because we're also combating police brutality, which is a lot more visible than the work we do on the back end, which is incarceration.
I see. That's incredible. I know you know this, but you are so incredibly fortunate, but we're all so incredibly fortunate to have Harry Belafonte with us to bridge the 50 years of history here, bringing his intimate knowledge and activism of the 60s and earlier to this generation, which obviously wasn't around physically then. But as you were talking, I was thinking of Bobby Kennedy here and going around and raising consciousness about the groups of Mississippi and Appalachia and so on. So this is truly, unfinished business, as you say, and taking up the mantle in a way so that it gets done right, in a sense, or you have a chance to really spend the time that's necessary to bring this about. Because, in fact, it was cut short, of course, in the 60s as King gets assassinated, and Bobby Kennedy and Malcolm and so on. And the counter movements, beginning with Nixon, the war on drugs. Well, anyway, we know all that. So it's so refreshing and so dynamic that you've resurrected this energy again in a way that is so incredibly, profoundly important. So you're focused, now you're based in New York City, you are. And
yes.
So you concentrate on criminal justice issues, police issues, and you were just saying before we went on, you were coming from court on what was that about in terms of?
So I just kind of want to go back, just
sure,
because I
whatever.
think
Yeah.
I want to just really emphasize the importance of somebody like a Harry Belafonte in this movement, guiding us and providing mentorship. And I've been around him for the past 16 years, and I've been working for him for 11 years. And it's truly an honor to sit with someone who provides guidance, but also allows you as a young person in this field to have your autonomy and to actually build out what you envision being the future of the movement. And so I say all that because Mr. Belafonte brings great knowledge. He also brings a lot of his peers to guide us, to mentor us. And I think that's something that is sometimes missing from the movement. A lot of elders are not necessarily connected to younger people, and so they don't know, they don't understand this decentralized structure in the Black Lives Movement. They're not seeing another Martin Luther King or another Malcolm X. They're really confused, right? And what we always say as young people who are on the ground is we are a leaderful movement, and there are a lot of organizations and individuals that are involved in elevating Black Lives Matter, elevating or wanting to stop police brutality. And so we are just one of the many groups that are out there pushing policy, pushing reforms, And it's with the guidance of somebody like him who also has dedicated his life, right? So there's an extension, there's a beginning, but there's also an ends to, a means to an end. And so I just wanted to say that about him because he has provided me with so much knowledge and access to knowledge that I always feel very guilty, and I just want to package it up and I want to share it with others and create a space where we actually train other individuals to be grounded in the philosophy of Dr. Kingian nonviolence, but also to understand different movements, right? Outside of the civil rights movement, there was also the Chicano movement, there was the American Indian movement, there was the Black Power movement, Black Liberation movement. There were so many other movements, the great boycott that came through the United Farm Workers movement. And if we really understood the tactics and apply them now, I think we would be able to see things a little differently. But I will also add that because of that knowledge, we are able to do things a lot quicker, right? Because we understand the past and the tactics that were used in the past, we're able to achieve success a little quicker than maybe other.
You're not starting from ground zero.
Exactly, we're not, and we're not reinventing the wheel. We're just adding again like our own flavor to it. But I do, you said something very important about Dr. King and how this is unfinished business. And it certainly is, because what Dr. King was doing, he was extremely radical, right? He was talking about economic withdrawals. He was talking about economic boycotts and
guaranteed annual income.
Exactly.
He was a democratic socialist.
He was. And so we know that, right? And we understand that about him. At the time, prior to his assassination, he had called Corky Gonzalez, he had called all these different...
Mayor of Denver.
Yes.
When I was growing up, I was in Denver.
He was a leader of the Chicano movement, and he had called Corky Gonzalez and all these different people from the different movements to come together under the umbrella of the Poor People's Campaign. And because he was going to do something so big, he was a threat to America. And so obviously he was assassinated. And so I think what we're trying to do is pick up the mantle, right? Use history, use the tactics from the past, but also know that it's a little bit more complex at this time because we are integrated, right? And Mr. Belafonte always shares with us how Dr. King had turned to Mr. B and had said, we're integrating into a burning house. And Mr. Belafonte asked the question, so then what do we do? He's like, we become firemen. And so, just kind of learning that and knowing that allows us to kind of do things and understand the different strategies that we need in order to achieve what we're trying to accomplish.
So we're still not, we're not letting the house burn to the ground, although it's happening. Watching Democracy Now! With Cornel West on this morning, talking about what's going on in the Republican convention there, and he's welcome to the madness. America's having a nervous breakdown, and the house metaphor, I think, is
and it is. And I remember attending the 50th anniversary of SNCC and meeting a lot of the people that were leaders in SNCC. And I remember kind of thinking like, well, I don't want to be a firewoman or a fireman. I want to be somebody who plants seeds, and I'm able to water those seeds. And so I think, there's also ways in which we can achieve that. And unfortunately, yes, with the climate of Trumpism, right? It's bringing up a lot of tension in America. But you had asked the question of where was I coming from, and I was coming from court because we are working with 12 police officers that are called the NYPD 12 that are whistleblowers, currently working for the New York Police Department.
Not retired.
They're not retired. They are current employees of the New York Police Department, and they have come out speaking against the racist quota system that Commissioner Bratton says does not exist. And so there's hours and hours of taping where
You're talking about the tickets and the
summons, the
broken windows business.
Broken windows policing, yes.
Pressures that the police are under.
Exactly. Right. And so we just came from delivering, the petition. And so it's interesting that you have a commissioner that states that this isn't happening, yet you have officers that are coming out risking their life, really, risking their jobs, risking their careers, saying, no, I actually have been told to go out and arrest Black and brown men. That's what they are told. And when they arrest white people or women, they are reprimanded.
And they're being told by what? The
They're
police
sergeants.
precinct? They're sergeants.
Yes, they're sergeants. And so there is no accountability. How do we hold a system accountable that is not willing to be held accountable? And so for them, I think it's important for us.
More than that, just lying about it too.
Exactly. I mean, it's caught on record, right? And there's a lot of interviews that are going out right now with Edwin Raymond, who's one of the main individuals that is part of the lawsuit.
Being brought by who?
Being brought by the attorneys. It's all 12 of them that are have a civil lawsuit against the NYPD, and so it's Edwin, Raymond, and the other 11 officers. And so what's really interesting to me is that you have these men who said they signed up to be police officers because they cared about their communities. And so those of us that are working to combat police brutality or police accountability understand that there are good police officers out there. But we want to ensure that the police departments are held accountable when they are pursuing these types of racist policies.
Well, this is going to be an incredible case, and they're going to need all the support in the world for this. And again, what you're building on is this beloved community, bringing people together as a moral movement. That I was struck as I was reading about the League, how much it is a moral issue.
It is.
And that's what you seem to be also addressing here with this case. So tell us a little more about what you feel about that moral issue.
Well,
what are we trying to do here?
I think for us, it's really about building collective power. It's about coming together as community members, as formerly incarcerated individuals, artists, activists, police officers, to build solutions. I think, there's a lane for everyone. People may not like what we do at Justice League, but there's a lane for people to really get involved as long as you're doing something and you're not accepting the status quo in life, right? What we see across the board is we see injustice happening in Black and brown communities, and so we need people to step up. And if my humanity does not allow me not to do anything, I would love to say the last 20 years I spent it, doing something different, but for the past 20 years I have spent it really committed to social justice, working in the field of violence prevention, working in the field of creating detention alternatives. And from the time when I started in this field, we've seen progress. We've seen the fact that we have a president who went into a prison. That's
important to acknowledge, because I think, again, your generation, it's easy to get cynical about all of
and
this.
it is, but again, being connected to people who have done this work for decades allows me to understand that it's a long-term strategy that we need to invest in. I worked for Santa Cruz County Probation Department for 2 years, in 2006 to 2008, before I left them to come on board full-time with Mr. Belafonte. And during that time, I was involved in system accountability in Santa Cruz, and where I learned a lot of how building coalitions and coming together to address the issue is really the only way in which we could achieve success. But that campaign, in order for them to be #1 in the nation for restorative justice, took decades. It took 15 years. It took a vision from an individual, John Rhodes, I believe his name was, who had been a chief in Sacramento, had come to Santa Cruz, and he was open to change. He was open to receiving the community when they were saying you can no longer expand the detention center because you are housing Latino kids and you're housing our children in there. And he was open to also listening to community-based organizations saying you need to invest back into the community, right? But there was a plan, and there was a collective plan. And I think for us, understanding those models allows us to move forward in the way in which we want to win.
And it's important to have those models. It's important to have the data that then people, politicians, or police chiefs can also talk about. The scholars, the activists. By the way, did you, Santa Cruz, Angela Davis, were you able to?
Yeah,
work
I
with her
did. I
at
mean,
some point
I
there?
studied at
Jeez.
UC Santa Cruz,
So
and
that's
Angela
where she
Davis and
taught.
Aida Hurtado and Craig Haney. A lot of
Right.
them were professors of mine, and so I went to a campus. I come from Southern California, and where I grew up, there was a lot of violence, a lot of gang violence. I grew up in a small town by the name of Oxnard, California, and there was always some type of shooting. There were messages coming from the prison onto the streets, relatives coming back from prison. So I grew up.
Your own brother had
My
some issues,
yeah,
right?
my
too,
brother
right?
was in and out of the system, and I had a sister buried on my 17th birthday. And I always say I learned restorative justice from my father when he had said he couldn't take another mother's child away when they were asking if they wanted to press charges against the man who took my sister's life. And I didn't study law, I didn't study criminology, I studied psychology because I've always known I wanted to help people. And so for me, growing up in the neighborhood that I grew up in, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of police brutality, there's a lot of police violence,
What do you
lack of
make- what-
accountability.
The psychology of it. Okay, so you're in the midst of this. What do you make of it? What do you bring with your own studies as you observe the violence in the community? What
well, for
connections
me,
can we
I
as an
didn't-
academic?
Well, I didn't know what I was experiencing was wrong. It was just a way of life.
Just natural?
It was just natural.
People making rational
You get out of
choices.
basketball
Interesting.
practice and you need to duck because there'd be a shooting or there was a fight. You just need to stay away. Or I remember there was an incident where my brother took me and we had gotten out of our basketball game, and my brother had gone to my game, and he drove my friends home, and he made a wrong turn. And next thing you know, we are held at gunpoint by police, and because he met the profile. And
that was seen, you internalized that as normal too.
I just thought
That's
it
the
was
way
normal.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember we were taken out at gunpoint from the vehicle. My brother was hogtied and he was held at gunpoint. And I remember sitting on the floor on the sidewalk and asking, what did we do wrong? And the officer
how did you feel? Were you angry?
I
or
was
you just-
angry. I was angry. I was sick and
Yeah.
tired of it. I mean, this happened so often.
You scared?
I don't know if I was scared. I think I was more. No, let me take a step back.
Sure.
I was afraid. I was afraid for my brother. I was afraid, and my brother was such a good guy, and I just couldn't believe that this would happen to him over and over and over. And so I grew up with that. And so when I went away to UC Santa Cruz and I studied psychology, I was then this big cloud got lifted from over my head where I wasn't surviving every single day. I was now put in a place where I could really begin to articulate the injustice that I faced as a young person and name it, because I didn't know how to name my pain. I didn't know how to name my anger. And this then allowed me to thrive. It allowed me to then sit in positions as a youth advocate to really create positive detention alternatives. What worked for me that did not get me caught up in a gang, that did not get me, pregnant at 14? What worked for me, and how could I replicate that for young people that were coming out the system when a lot of the young people I was working with that were system involved looked like me, came from the same backgrounds, all these different things. So my life has been dedicated to that, to ensuring that people have a voice that don't necessarily have a voice in decision-making tables, that I also represent those that are incarcerated, and that I also advocate for building an agenda that's going to serve our communities.
So the violence endemic to the community was not about a few bad apples, and it was
Systemic.
systemic. The system, the violence of the system outside that controlled the community was, in sense, most of the source of the violence. If you're going to talk about some sort of causal link, which is what Black Lives Matter, right, tries to address. Let's look at the violence that's being foisted on the inner city communities by the white power structure, the privileged white power structure. Is that what you're beginning to then think about as in Santa Cruz there? I mean, again, the violence that you were experiencing every day, it was something that, endemic to the community and yet caused by outside forces
It
that
certainly
you didn't
was.
quite understand at the time?
How could you when you're trying to survive? It
Right.
wasn't until I left my environment. It wasn't until
Right.
I went away to UC Santa Cruz and I was able to then articulate what was happening. And I also learned that white kids did not experience what I experienced. However, other Black and Latino kids did. And so I began to identify the injustices and
The institutional racism.
the institutional racism. But
Well,
I also,
oh, I'm sorry.
But you know,
Yeah.
studying not only psychology, I studied the structures of racism
Right.
and how America was founded on the structures of racism in the beginning with this caste system. So a lot of our institutions replicate that.
Right.
Our police departments replicate that. Our probation departments replicate that. Our educational institutions replicate that. When you are, 2% of the population at a university, there's obviously something wrong. So, to me, it's now being able to sit in spaces like this and share that with the community that's not necessarily aware of these racist structures.
Yeah, that most take as normal, but what you're saying is not normal.
Right.
It's not- and by the way, I'm just interested, was the police chief at Santa Cruz white?
No,
or
I'm telling
African-American?
the police
That was
where I
open-
grew up in Oxnard. And,
Oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Oxnard. Yeah, okay.
The police chief was white.
Okay,
yeah,
so but
growing
he
up.
was still open.
No, Santa Cruz is where I was able to create the change. That's
Okay,
where I
got-
ended
all
up
right,
moving to
all right,
and
got-
becoming a
right,
probation
okay.
officer. Santa Cruz probation chief were white. Yes,
But they
Judy
were-
Cox,
Right.
John Rhodes, Scott
Rose, yeah.
McDonald.
So they were more
They were-
still. They were more open. Their consciousness had been raised, right? So they
It
were more
was,
open.
but it was also the pressure of the community, and that's why
Right.
we understand civic engagement is important, because if you are comfortable, then you don't push the envelope. But if you are uncomfortable, then you begin to make change, and that's the way you're going to see change happen. Is that these
When you say
chief-
uncomfortable, threatened, is that a more
yeah,
accurate
when you're,
way
I
of-
think when you're threatened, for instance, the Latino Affairs Commission began to have town hall conversations with community members, letting them know that the detention center was going to be expanded. And so when you look at the data of who's locked up, it was predominantly Latino kids. So of course, we don't want our children incarcerated, so the community needed to rise up and do something about it and put political pressure on our department, put political pressure on our mayor, on our elected officials to actually say, no, we're not gonna expand the detention center. We're gonna look at other methods on
I
how
see.
to reform the system. And that's what happened in Santa Cruz. And that's what can happen here in New York, right? We understand that New York is a place that has biased policing, has racist policies. And so if our leadership, quote unquote, Commissioner Bratton and Mayor de Blasio, were really about reducing racial disparities, really creating incentives for law enforcement, for police officers to create positive relationships with community members, then we would see a whole different type of policing.
Do you think they're capable of that? Do you think that you, the league
I'm gonna have
and the
to-
community, are you
I'm gonna have-
optimistic?
I
Well, I don't know if
can't
optimistic is the word.
no,
You're going to try, though.
I think I'm encouraged by my
It's a good word.
coalition partners, because a lot of the people that we work with and we've been collaborating with, like CPR and the Justice Committee and other individuals, have been working to change these policies, to change and hold the police accountable. So I would hope, right, that Commissioner Bratton would do the right thing. Am I optimistic about it? I am not, because he has not done the right thing. He
So-
continues to create this divisive type of
Policing.
policing. The
Taking
way
a
he's-
different form.
He does. I mean,
A little less stop and frisk, which, we're involved in, but more broken windows. So, right?
And
Explain that a little for the audience so
Well,
they really understand that.
I think what happens is that with the case of Eric Garner was selling Lucy cigarettes, which are loose cigarettes, in front of a convenience store, and he was stopped and frisked and ultimately lost his life because of that. And so what they say is that, you know, they're trying to fix these broken windows, which some of these broken windows don't need fixing. A lot of people are out there selling cigarettes. We saw Alton Sterling selling CDs, right?
Yes.
That's broken windows policing, when you are going up to an individual and you're arresting them. Ultimately, not that in every case of broken windows policing a life is taken, but we need to eliminate that type of policing, because that doesn't happen in Park Slope.
And the logic is presumably if you stop it at the smaller level,
It doesn't spread.
There's absolutely
right.
no empirical evidence at all for
Exactly.
that.
There's none.
It doesn't spread and becomes more
It
serious.
doesn't spread.
And all that.
And so what we see in communities of color, what we see in the South Bronx,
But they're
and
making
East
that
New
argument,
York,
as you know,
they are making that argument.
that more the homicide rates go up or this and that. And you see it, I think, also, right, with the police chief of Milwaukee in the conference, the convention yesterday, saying Black Lives Matter advocates are actually indications of anarchy, a breaking down of the system. So there is this blowback to what you're saying.
And
right?
I have to disagree with what they're saying. I have to say that Black Lives Matter is a decentralized structure, and it's got state sanctions, right? We are operating state by state. And we understand what needs to be changed in our states, but we have this ideology, this common ideology, and we are also invested in nonviolence. So I think as it pertains to New York and Commissioner Bratton, I feel as though, again, he creates this climate of divisiveness between officers and communities. A lot of us that are out protesting are not just protesters, we're organizers, we're executive directors, and he's created a whole separate unit within the police department to deal with protesters and quote unquote terrorists. And so I just think a lot of what needs to happen is this openness to police accountability. And I also understand New York is a police state. You see police officers everywhere, but you primarily see them in Black and Latino communities. And that's not the way in which we need to deal with our communities, by over-surveillancing us or over-policing us. We need to do something different. And I think some of the policies that are in place right now or trying to get pushed forward are the Right to Know Act, which, you know,
tell us about that,
Melissa Mark Viorito actually had a backdoor meeting with Commissioner Bratton, the city councilwoman. And so right now, as we're in this place, we're having what's called a Twitter town hall. Communities United for Police Reform has put it on so that we can continue to push the Right to Know Act. We have the right to know what police officers stopping us and why. And that's not happening. People think, well, you should know.
They have to explain it.
Exactly. And also identify themselves, and that doesn't happen.
Right. I know there's a couple other demands. Create an NYPD training program.
Comprehensive training program for the NYPD. Right now, I know Mayor de Blasio has said that they have enforced some additional training for the police department, but that's being done by police officers. And Edwin Raymond, who is part of the NYPD 12, has said they need a critical race theory training that is done by outside groups who are actually experts in this outside of the police officers trying to train themselves.
Well, okay. Critical, so what that would mean really facing white privilege, white supremacy, psychology, and a culture. So that gets us now. I agree with you, of course, but how does one put that into policy for the police? I think it's interesting. The police themselves probably, if you took a vote somehow, most of them, I bet you most would say, let's do it. Be surprised.
Again, it's these.
How do you make the thing more responsive, as you're saying? The league is so much about getting people's consciousness raised and more responsive to human and moral issues. And the police aren't, separate from all of that. They're part of this larger system that you're trying to open up here and free us.
But again, like I mentioned earlier, it's leadership willing to accept that. And if you are saying no, and you do not, if first of all, if you have police officers within your department that are coming out saying that there's a racist quota system, and you are saying, no, you are lying, but there are recordings, you are not open to change.
Well, you're the psych major, so you're.
Well, I'm
know.
a psych major, but it doesn't mean I'm a psychoanalyst.
No, I know,
you know?
I know. What I'm saying, look, Bratton has been doing this since the '60s. He was a fierce opponent of the counterculture, the demonstrations against the war. I mean, you know, he served in Vietnam and so on. So he's been thinking like this for a long, long time. He's become very sophisticated.
And you had said something that that raised kind of a, you know, a lot of people will say, well, broken policing or broken windows policing actually works, right? We've seen a decline in violence, all these things. You said something to that. However, you didn't validate it. That's the belief.
There's no empirical evidence for that.
There's none. But I also want to name the fact that there are violence preventionists, gun violence preventionists in this city that are part of a coalition, Cure Violence. And they are the ones that are out in the streets every single day stopping bullets. So we cannot just claim that it's because there's police officers that are enforcing broken windows, that's the reason why violence has come down. I mean, we also have
members,
to,
right?
We have to
doing this work, going out into the communities.
Not just ex-gang members. I mean, but it's the Erica Fords out of Queens who has an organization called Life Camp, and she works with young people, and these young people are phenomenal. Shan Duke, as well as A.T. Mitchell. These individuals are individuals and a whole other coalition. There's this huge gun violence coalition that comes together to talk about solutions, who are out there every single day as first responders to the violence. And so when we think that broken windows policing, like you said, that's the claim that people are making works, we also have to look deeper into the other programs that are out there on the streets actually doing some of the work that police officers are doing.
Absolutely. No, I'm very glad you brought up some of those examples. And I know I've had Shan Duke on radio show. He's coming on the show here too in a few weeks and stuff. But he's also amazing. Now there are a couple of other things that I was very interested in the demands of the league here. An end to the criminalization of young people in the New York school system. The criminalization of young people in the New York school system. Now,
stopping the school-to-prison pipeline. Right now, we obviously know, or maybe people don't know, but a lot of schools that have black and brown kids have metal detectors. So when you walk into a school, there's a metal detector, there are police officers, and again, it's this idea that metal detectors and police officers are going to keep schools safe and they're going to reduce violence in the schools. Well, what that ends up doing is that police officers then begin to penalize young people for childish behavior. We never had police officers at our schools.
Right.
I mean, if there was something major that happened, we'd have the SWAT team on the roofs in Southern California. But for the most part, a lot of people did not grow up with police officers being the disciplinaries, right? You had principals, you had counselors, you had parents that were involved. And that's the case that I was making in regards to Jaisha Scott. The 5-year-old girl that was being handcuffed was a 5-year-old black girl who was handcuffed by 3 police officers, and her mother was never contacted. So what does that do to a child, right? So talking about psychology, you begin to traumatize children. You also begin to normalize the behavior walking through metal detectors. What type of path does that lead individuals to? So it's a direct school-to-prison pipeline. And so when we're talking about stopping that, is we want for police officers to not be in schools disciplining children.
Put in that position.
Exactly. We want for there to be counselors. You know, there's one counselor to I don't know how many hundreds of kids. We need more. We need to invest into our schools. And if you look at the data, if you look at where these police officers are, they're in primarily Black and Latino schools. And it all has to. And, you know, I think it's all related to, you know, people saying, well, what about the Columbines, right? Well, we understand that Columbine's going to happen. However, that's not happening in a Black and Latino school. And so I think we really need to kind of begin to look at mass incarceration, right? We talk about mass incarceration often. We talk about the pillars that hold up mass incarceration. And we understand that there are 2.1 million individuals that are incarcerated in the United States now. And those individuals, out of those individuals, it's primarily Black and Latino. So we as advocates, and there's, again, a lot of groups doing wonderful work that are trying to stop that. The war on drugs put a lot of Black and Latino individuals in prison, right? But yet you have white children who are using marijuana and also snorting cocaine at higher levels than Black and Latino kids.
Yeah, well, we've had Carl Hart on, who has been a strong advocate for the ending of the drug war. Do you know the work of the psychiatrist Dr. James Gilligan, who was the lead author of the Rikers Report, who has called for an end to mass incarceration, ending Rikers, closing it up, and creating an environment of therapeutic communities for violent repeaters. There would be constraining of people who at this point still need to be separated from the community, but not punishment. And I think what you're getting at here is so important, this creating of this beloved community through love and restorative justice. I was thinking of Fania Davis, her efforts out in Oakland, creating these circles of peace where these young kids can go as they're agitated and before the anger comes out in violence. I mean, that's the transformation you're talking about that Mr. Belafonte and Mr. King were talking about back in the 60s. How do we create this beloved community, this transformative love, this radical love, where we start really caring for each other in ways, instead of handcuffing them and building walls and so on. So that's the other part of this, the necessity to connect as moral human beings. And policies
I think a lot of us are connected as
that.
moral human beings. We also need to not shy away from the fact that prisons were set up and currently are for-profit industries, right? The private prison industrial complex has created a revenue for corporations to get their products made in prisons and pay individuals who are incarcerated minimum 23 cents a day or 23 cents an hour, you know, and so I think we also need to dissect that component of it. It's become the new slave labor. So there's different elements to mass incarceration. I think creating the beloved community is something that the Gathering is attempting to achieve and to build. But also too, you know, you mentioned somebody who's working to shut down Rikers. There's also the Close Rikers campaign that Just Leadership is spearheading with other organizations and coalitions, and Gathering and Justice League being a part of that through Glenn Martin, right? So Glenn Martin is somebody who is working on ensuring that we look at a long-term strategy as to how to close down Rikers, because closing down Rikers would be better in the long run. And if we make the investment right now to close it down, then we will be saving money in the long run and investing back into our communities.
Right, so the economic argument could be made, but what you're also talking about, the deeper, profound psychological, moral level is the end of humiliation. And because that's, in a lot of ways, what prison is about, are many of these punitive criminal justice policies, to humiliate, to disrespect, to shame those who've been traditionally in subservient roles, to perpetuate that master role.
Right.
And that gets hard to...
I mean, and there's a whole system that nobody really talks about that's within the prison system. And I certainly am not going to get into that right now, but there's a lot of control happening. I mean, could you imagine being in a prison where there's 100% crime every single day? Right? The guards are at the top, then you have other individuals that are also making sure that the prison operates the way it does. But you know, just to your point, you had mentioned something earlier about the violent offenders, right? Well, I will have to kind of I like to dissect that a little bit further, right? So we talk about the Raise the Age campaign. New York State, North Carolina are 2 states within
16.
the U.S. who automatically try 16-year-olds as adults. Khalif Browder was a 16-year-old that allegedly stole a backpack, right? And so he was placed in Rikers. He was automatically put into Rikers. His family could not make bail. And so Khalif Browder spent 3 years at Rikers without going in front of a judge, right? And out of those 3 years, 2 years were spent in solitary confinement. He was beaten. He was abused in every which way imaginable, right? And then he gets out, Scott, we can't find the person who said you did it, right? But Khalif would never actually qualify under the Raise the Age campaign because his the accusations against him was that it was aggravated assault. So he would have been considered a violent offender. So I think we really need to be careful when we talk about, let's it's easy to say the nonviolent offenders because that's the low-hanging fruit. Let's remove them all. Let's create positive alternatives for them. But we have to really deal with the violent offenders. While the policies that are made up nowadays are what then creates this type of violent characteristic. Not that the behavior is violent, but we will say if I were to throw a pin at you, right, and we're in a classroom, then that's assault with a deadly weapon, even though I'm messing with you, right?
Yeah,
and so
There's
again,
a lot of things
the
we should just-
criminalization of young people
goes too far.
It does. A lot of the policies and the people that are making
True.
these policies have never been in these classrooms, have never stepped foot into a prison. So when we talk about how do we create the beloved community, well, I welcome elected officials to come into a prison, to be in community. You come out to get our votes. Come out and actually meet with the community, your constituency, meet with those that are incarcerated, spend the night there. Imagine how many judges would be sentencing individuals to prison or to lock up if they knew the environment or had ever experienced it itself.
Or had their kid.
Exactly. But their kid will never make it there.
No.
And the reason their kid will never make it there because they're able to call somebody and say, my child does not need to be there, right? And that's the thing is that we constantly criminalize poor people. And we know that poor people don't have the same resources to get a lawyer, to pay the fines, to pay the bail. And so who do we see locked up? We see people who are impacted by poverty incarcerated. And one of the things that, there's this documentary out right now about this judge from Pennsylvania called Kids for Cash. And this Pennsylvania judge was putting children in a private facility. He had closed down the public detention center and had gotten a kickback from the contractors of over millions of dollars to then send all the young people that came before him to this private detention center. And so again, what I say is that we really need to dissect the system. We need to develop a mechanism in order to hold the system accountable. And a lot of the young people that are currently incarcerated do not belong incarcerated. We can create something for them in their community, wraparound services, family services. We want to be able to figure out what is it that the individual needs. We do IEPs, individual educational plans. We need to do that for individuals that are not necessarily at risk or not at risk. That's completely the wrong word. But we need to kind of invest more into our children and
nurturing
and like you said,
and
everything, mental health services.
mental health, exactly.
I don't know how many times I get on that
train. Tutoring
train.
and all that. Yeah.
I get on that train, and so many individuals have mental health issues. And so if we don't see that, we're blind. We are blind. But you know what? I will say the people that are making these decisions aren't taking the train the way I am, right? So for them, they live in other cities, they live in big houses, they live in big mansions, they have drivers. They can create an environment where they don't have to face this, right? But every single day when we walk down the street and we see these injustices, we know we got to work harder.
The Brattons and Kellys, literally are out in the Hamptons, not concerned with broken windows out there. That's where they are having their vacations and so on. But the Black Lives Matter movement here, the movement, especially among the younger generation, it's important. I hear this a lot in my own classes. Well, but all lives matter, right? You hear that all the time and so on. But it does have to be a race-based movement to a certain extent, and that has to be seen as leadership. In a sense, as you were saying about Mr. Belafonte having the wisdom to be the mentor and give you the guidance that and the experience that he had, but at the same time allowing you to grow and develop and play off some of the things he's telling you. So isn't that the same thing that we need to do as a country here, and Black Lives Matter too?
So I will say, Mr. Belafonte and I, we have meetings. We come together when I feel defeated or when I feel like, I need somebody to just kind of take me out of my ego and give me a historical perspective. He's definitely there. And he will say to me, Carmen, there are moments where I'm going to let you stick your finger in the socket, and there's going to be times when I tell you, do not stick your finger in the socket. But I'm going to let you find your way, because I'm not going to be here forever. And so it is a really great exchange that he and I have, in the sense of he's able to, give this historical landscape and give me a depth of wisdom that I probably haven't experienced. He and I are 50 years apart. But then I'm also able to let him know what's happening on the ground, what's going on with young people. So it's a really beautiful exchange. And what I will say in regards to the Black Lives Matter and the All Lives Matter argument is, you've traveled to different countries. I've been to Cuba, I've been to Mexico, I've been to Germany, and I've worked with Afro-Venezuelans, Afro-Cubans, Afro-Mexicanos, Afro-Germans, and what I've seen across the board is Black people constantly being oppressed. And those that are, again, at the top making decisions are white, Latinos, white Europeans, whatever it may be, right? And so for me, it's understanding that once Black people are free, then we're all free. And so we cannot erase the 400 years of slavery. We cannot erase the fact that who we see on TV being killed by police are Black and brown men. But we, as I always say to my Latino community, we need to show up for Black Lives Matter, because we understand at this moment that it's Black people that are being impacted by these policies that are put into place. So yes, to your point, all lives do matter. But once Black Lives Matter, that's when we're really going to see a change. And
That's
at
so
this
important.
moment, Black lives don't matter. And we see it every single day when we turn on the TV. I mean, to this day, I was sick this morning because of what I witnessed on TV with the Republican convention. And I was asking myself, why do I feel sick to my stomach? And it's because this year, 2016, has been extremely difficult, right? With the killings of all these individuals, with the killings of these police officers, it's too much. And we can mourn the violence, we could mourn the killings of police officers as we mourn the killings of the Alton Sterlings and the Eric Garners and the Megan Hockadays. But we also want police officers to be held accountable for killing our brothers and sisters, right? And so one of the things that I think is a very dangerous narrative out there is that people say, well, Black Lives Matter is a racist whatever. And it's not. We are a nonviolent group. We are a leaderful community. There are tactics that we all use, one of them being protest, but there are several individuals that work in the field of criminal justice, police brutality. But we are also saying we do not want violence at all. We don't want violence.
To anybody, right?
To anybody.
So it is a win-win, and that's what really needs to be stressed, I think, as you are, in these positive alternative movements and programs and policies, because the other alternative, which you see with the Trumps, is divide and conquer and creating fear on our different groups. So again, that seems to be the key, is again the King vision of that moral community. I notice we only have a minute or two to go. I wish we could go on and on here, so again, that moral community that we're trying to create is a win-win community. And those officers that have now brought the case are struggling for all the officers who are being oppressed and exploited, and in a strange, funny way, trying to liberate Bratton from the lies and hypocrisy that if he and whoever else is promoting on this policy.
If police officers can actually come out and not be like if they were to file a complaint, it goes through their own department. So could you imagine the backlash that has on that individual, right?
Sure.
So if we created a mechanism, an outside institute that would then monitor the complaints that are happening within the police department, we would alleviate a lot of this type of retaliation within the department, right? If we actually were able to create a mandate, whether it's a state mandate or a federal mandate on police accountability, then we would be able to then hold police officers accountable for saying things that, for telling their fellow police officers to practice unjust laws, right, or policies. Right. So I think
and
what we need
them.
to do, and I think that's the beginning, and that's the way in which we're going to begin to hold police accountable.
Absolutely. And we're being held accountable by the time here.
Yeah.
And Carmen, thank you so much. As Harry would say too, right on. Thank you so very, very much for your energy, your soulfulness, and I look forward to working with you many more times here in the struggle. And thank you so very, very much for watching us again on The Radical Imagination. This is Jim Vrettos, your host. We'll see you again next week. Thank you, Carmen, so much.
Thank you.
Yes?
That was an hour?